So welcome to Consultancy Dreaming. First of all, a big shout out to the sponsors, Sharon Picks, Active Campaign and Cirrus Insights. So my name is Ian Gotts. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Elements.Cloud, and I've been in the Salesforce ecosystem 20 years as a customer and a partner, and before that I had 12 years at Accenture as a consultant. So I've definitely lived your life there as a consultant. And I want to spend some time now as a session talking about how you draw diagrams, how you engage clients, but more importantly, how you deliver results. And if you scan the QR code, that will take you a link to the deck and to the resources that I'm going to talk about. So as the quote there says, whilst not everyone enjoys documenting what we're about to build or what we have built, we all understand the value of walking into a well-documented org. I'm very true if you're a consultant. You inherit an org with a new client, you've no idea what's been done, why things have been built. So documentation is critically important, which is why it's so exciting that at Trailhead DX, Salesforce announced two standards: Salesforce Universal Process Notation for business analysts and Salesforce Diagrams for architects. Now you might be thinking, okay, which do I have to choose? Do I do UPN or do I do Salesforce Diagrams? And hopefully throughout the course of the session, you'll understand that both of them are valuable documentation standards, but they actually have different audiences and different purposes, but there actually is an interconnection between the two. And you can see there on the left-hand side, UPN, a very process-oriented diagramming technique. On the right-hand side, Salesforce Diagrams, more technical, aimed at systems documentation. So let's contrast the two. So Salesforce UPN. The audience is end users, so you're engaging them to understand what the requirements are, architects so that they understand how to solution the end application, management so they understand metrics, they can understand how to drive the business, and regulators if you're in a highly regulated organization. So the purpose of these diagrams is to validate requirements, drive out waste by streamlining processes, deliver training, but also be support for regulatory compliance. It's a hierarchical approach. You can go down as many levels as you want. There's not like 3 levels, 10 levels. You go down to the level of detail you need to make sure it delivers the results. And there's a very simple building block. Because we need to engage these different audiences, we need a simple building block. There's no point having 200 different shapes where every shape has a different nuance. We want something simple that everyone can understand. Whether you're an end user, no matter what level of seniority, no matter where you are in the business, finance, service, sales, logistics, it doesn't matter. It needs to be easily understood. So that's the whole principle of UPN. And there is training content on Trailhead. And again, there'll be some links at the end to in the resources to that training content. If we contrast that with Salesforce Diagrams, the audience here is obviously designed by the architects, but the business analysts get involved in understanding it because it has a systems perspective or a systems view of the landscape. Obviously, developers need to look at it. You might be engaging end users if they're more technical. So what's the purpose? The purpose is solutions design. We want to build an understanding about how we're going to build the application. More and also, as important, how are we going to architect it? And what are the integrations to third-party systems? No longer is Salesforce an island, it's now connected to multiple systems, and those integrations are critically important. And then finally, we need to have a data model, or at least a subset of the data model that makes sense. And the Salesforce Diagrams approach follows something called the C4 model. So there are 4 different levels of the diagram, and each one has a specific purpose. So there is some standard terminology, again, not a huge number of shapes, but some simple terminology. So this is all about consistency. And again, the training there is not on Trailhead, but it's actually on architect.salesforce.com. And again, at the end, there'll be a link to how to get to that training. So I said there was a very simple building block for Salesforce UPN, and it really is, when does something happen? What happens? Starts with a verb: engage, review, confirm. There is the bar on the bottom at who is responsible, what systems are used, and then an output: why does something happen? And if you need to know more detail about this particular step, then you either drill down using the corner or you attach using the paperclip. Now, this concept of a hierarchical diagram means that you can simplify quite complex processes by having only 8 or 10 boxes on a screen, which means that it's easy enough to understand. But then you can drill down and drill down until you get to more detail. So rather than having this flowchart diagram with 100 boxes which you can't make sense of, you can go, okay, I get this is lead to cash. Okay, now can I drill down? Okay, I'm now in the lead box. Now I'm in actually how we actually qualify a lead. So you can see you're drilling your way down. Salesforce Diagrams has a slightly different approach. The level 1 is the big picture. That's the systems landscape. That's the core capabilities. Level 2 is taking an area of that and focusing in a bit more detail. Level 3 is, again, more detail again, but starting to think about the process or the data flow, the interactions. And then level 4 is the data model. But just the data model, just the objects that are involved, not all 400 objects, but just the ones that are involved in that particular, that were involved in level 3. So again, this level of abstraction is very consistent between the two diagramming standards. And as I said, they go hand in hand. It's not I've got to use UPN, I've got to use diagrams. It depends on the audience and what you're trying to achieve, but there are obviously some connections between those. So we think about managing hierarchies of diagrams, there are 3 considerations. The first one is how you manage the hierarchy. Okay, if we have 200 diagrams sitting on a hard disk, how do we understand how to get from level 1 to level 2 to level 3? That's the first thing. The second thing is, what's the numbering? So the typical approach is that the top level is 1. If I've drilled down on box 2, that diagram is called 1.2. If I drill on that diagram, I drill down to, on, say, box 4, it's 1.2.4. So there's this hierarchical numbering structure, almost like breadcrumbs, so you understand where you are in the diagram structure. But the other point is we need diagram integrity. If someone changes something on a level 3 diagram or a level 7 diagram, do we make sure that level 6 diagram, if I'm on a level 7 and level 8 are correct? Or let's take a simpler example. If I'm at a level 2 diagram and I make a change there, how do I reflect the changes back into level 1 and also down into level 3? If I change the numbering, how does that numbering ripple through? If I change the name, how does that go through? So this is all about managing the diagrams so they are easy to navigate, easy to find the one you want. The second point is that these aren't isolated diagrams. They are valuable assets which will have a life beyond the project. They are the assets which drive the configuration knowledge of the systems you've built. And as we have three major releases from Salesforce and obviously our own releases, we are constantly changing the system, and therefore this documentation needs to be stayed up to date. But it also needs to be connected to other assets. So a process step or something in a Salesforce diagram could be linked to notes, specifications, user stories, requirements, and to metadata items. So again, making sure that this is connected to those other assets. So the power is actually having that aggregated view, knowing that this process touches that data, touches this workflow, is actually supported by this requirement, or this user story was why we changed it. All of that, once it's connected, becomes incredibly valuable. And again, as consultants, if we can build that and leave that with a client, then we're adding a ton of value. But it also means that you're more likely to be invited back because you understand how this all hangs together. And the last of those 3 considerations there is about access rights, collaboration, and versioning. We can't be drawing diagrams and then emailing them around as PDFs or emailing them with links to, oh, you can get to it on that drive, but then you have access rights to go and edit it. This is valuable documentation, so we need to understand who can edit it, who can view it. We also need to be able to make sure that if people have comments, there is a place they can comment on a diagram. Almost if you think about like a Slack channel or a chatter group for every single diagram, so the discussion happens there, not in email. And the last point is versioning. We need to be able to sign these versions off. we need to realize that different diagrams cycle at different rates. The top level diagram may not go through very many versions, but the lower level diagrams may go through a lot. So it's not versioning of a diagram, it's versioning of a diagram in the context of the hierarchy. So I've written a blog about this based on 20 years of managing diagram hierarchies. It's not impossible, but you just need to think about it as you go into it to make sure you're applying the right approach and you've got the right process going in. So I said at the beginning you need both Salesforce UPN and Salesforce diagrams in an implementation. And if I think about a very simple implementation lifecycle here, validating requirements, defining work items, building, testing and documenting the solution, and then training users, you can see that pretty much UPN and Salesforce diagrams are used all the way along. So if I think about the left, validating requirements, UPN is all about engaging users to understand the requirements. You're starting to maybe build out the entity relationship diagrams or link to that, which is where Salesforce diagrams may come in. As you're defining the work items, building the user stories, again, leaning on UPN because that's the operational processes, but this is where you're solutioning and therefore you're starting to build out those Salesforce diagrams in more detail. As you start to get into build, test and document, clearly in the build phase, Salesforce diagrams is critically important. When we're getting into the test phase, we're looking back at how do we test against user requirements is where the Salesforce UPN diagrams would come in. And then finally, when we're training users, those Salesforce diagrams, the UPN diagrams we created at the very beginning, Salesforce UPN is used, maybe embedded in Salesforce, embedded in applications, because it is the training material. We created it with the end users. Let's make sure that that's the training material that they use. If they need changes, fine. Make the suggestions there, write in the diagram, and then we can drive that feedback. So I know we've all had difficult clients, clients who they map processes by going, oh, well, you do one of those, and I want one of those, and then this happens, and that happens. And it may be slightly ambiguous. So what I want to do is I'm going to spend a bit of time mapping a business process with Ryan Reynolds, obviously the actor who you may know from Deadpool, but who also is the owner of Aviation Gin. So I'm going to do a bit of a live mapping workshop with him, and in say 15 minutes we're going to get out a full process map based on his input. And I've done a bit of research on Ryan. Clearly he's a very successful actor. The Proposal, a couple of Deadpools, and he's also made some very, very funny marketing videos. But he's the owner of Aviation Gin, and has recently sold that to Diageo and has a long earn-out. So he has a vested interest in the success of Aviation Gin. So obviously prior to the workshop, I've done a lot of research on that. I've also spent some time thinking about and looking at the Aviation Gin process. And also it's important to do the research. So let's see how good it is. Cheers. Wow, that really is good. Right, let's get mapping. So let's hear from Ryan in his own words how the Aviation Gin process works.
You know, people come up to me all the time and they say, what makes Aviation Gin so delicious? Most of the time I run away because non-celebrities frighten me. But here is the answer.
It begins each morning at 4 a.m. The distillers of Aviation American Gin rise to greet the new day with 4 hours of silent meditation.
Fantastic. So let me stop you there and let's just define the first bit of the process. So prior to the workshop, I'd already created a process map inside Elements. I popped the Aviation Gin logo in there, and I put down here that I thought the output was going to be sales and earn-out, and the beginning would be demand. But listening to Ryan, that things start at 4 a.m. and the first step here is the team meditate. So we can connect that. So that's the activity, they meditate. And you can add a resource and it was I think they said the distillers. There we go. So I've already preloaded some of those resources in. So the distillers meditate. So we have an output there, and let's add an activity. So let's hear from Ryan what happens next.
From there, it's a quick scoot down to the grove. The citrus fruits are misted using only the tears of aviation's owner, me, Ryan Reynolds.
Right, perfect. So they scoot down to the grove. So this must be after 4 hours. And I can just drag that resource across. Right, so what I think I heard here is that we missed the citrus fruits using tears. Right, so that presumably is the distillers again are doing that. And the input from there must be, we must have some tears. So we've got tears coming in, and we're actually at the grove. So we must collect the tears, and I think they said they came from the owner, from Ryan. So let's go and add the resource. Owner, there we are, owner Ryan, we can add him. And presumably there must be some reason why we've got those tiers. So let's say it's because there was no Oscars. There we go. So now we have, they meditate, they scoot to the grove, they now miss the citrus fruits using the tears, and we've now collected the tears. So what happens next?
All of our botanicals are humanely caught, cage-free, and grain-fed. The reason some people don't drink gin is that strong juniper taste. So, after apologizing to each berry individually, we beat the living hell out of them, creating a smoother, more refined finish.
Let me pause you there for a moment. Let's work out what's happened there. So we said that we harvest the fruits, and who does that? Presumably not the distillers. Oh, so there aren't any pickers, so let's add that as a new resource. It's a human resource, there we are. So, and when's that ready? Presumably when they are ripe. And then we had a process there where we said we beat the berries. I wonder who does that. So let's add a resource there. Let's call those beaters, and we'll create a new resource for those. There we go. And this is when they have been picked. Fantastic. So we've now beaten the berries. So what happens next?
To ensure that heavenly taste, every bottle of aviation is ordained by the Unitarian Church of Fresno, California.
Okay, so we've just said we are, you just said that we ordain the bottles, and luckily we've already created But Ryan, I need to pause you for a moment there. We went from beating berries to having bottles already ready to be shipped. So I think there's a little bit of a process that's missed here. So maybe there's actually a process called actually make the gin. And presumably there's a process here called bottle the gin. So we now have beaten berries. We now have gin And we now have bottled gin. Now, fortunately, there's another team who knows a bit more about making gin than probably Ryan does, who's already been mapping out the process for how we make gin. So instead of drilling down on this to get more detail, instead I'm going to import the process map that I know that they've already been creating. So instead of saying drill down new, I can see drill down import. And there's the make gin process. So I'm now going to import that, and I'm sure that the distillers are involved in making the gin, so we'll pop that one on there. And if we just roll over, we can see that there are some process diagrams already been built there by the distillers for exactly how they make the gin. Now, I could click there and we could drill down and have a look at that in more detail. So we can see here the process finishes with gin, but it starts with citrus fruits, crushed berries, and mountain water rye. So those are, I don't see that at the higher level. I need to go back and make sure that we've got those other items on there. So let's just go back up. So what I heard here is that we also have water and rye coming in, but it feels like the citrus goes straight in there and they're not beaten. So it's only the berries that are peaked. So this is citrus fruits. And these are the berries, go that route. So again, the act of understanding a little bit more the lower levels gives us more input to make sure that that top level is correct. And obviously the output was correct, which is right. So we bottle the gin. We now bottle gin. We now have ordained bottles. So back to you, Ryan. What happens next?
And then, before it departs home, serenaded with the healing music of Sarah McLachlan.
So the next thing that happens is we serenade the bottles. And there is Sarah McLachlan. So we'll add her. So then what? So back to you, Ryan.
Some might call this overkill, but the next time you visit your local mixologist and you murder that silky smooth aviation martini, well, who's the killer now, asshole? Aviation, an American original. Now owned by a Canadian.
Can I stop you there? I think we missed a couple of steps out. So presumably we need to now ship the gin so those mixologists can do their magic. And let's add a resource on there. So there's no shippers, so let's put shippers on there as a resource. And that would be ready to ship. So that obviously gives us sales. So orders for gin need to come in. So presumably there are orders for the gin coming in from customers. And then we have a process here called earn out. I'm assuming that once we have been paid, so we need to be paid for orders, and what we need there is an order coming in and confirmation of receipt. Of shipment. And an order. And there's Ryan's earn out. So there is a very quick process. The numbers aren't quite lined up. So if we just right mouse click, we can say, get all the numbers lined up. So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 correctly. We could even line up each of these diagram boxes so it's nice and neat and tidy. So we need to add a resource there. The bottlers. Just straighten that line up. Perfect. We now got a process here, draft. And really we want to publish it so we've actually got some version control over it. So I can say, let's make ready for release. Then we choose a release. So this was the workshop. So and I want to include not just this diagram, but also those lower levels, because I want to make sure that those are also signed off. So I've now said I want this to be released. And if I nip over into the application, the release page, I can then go and publish this. So here are just two diagrams, that top level diagram and the Make Gin one. So I'll hit publish. And it was successfully published. If I now go back to the diagram and do a refresh. So if we look now and look at the release tab, we can now see that we have a draft and a published version. So now we can start making changes, confident that we've got some version control that we can actually work out what has changed. So the act of mapping the process has given us a far better understanding for all of us, the distillers, the bottlers, the shippers. We've all got a consistent picture to understand how the aviation gin process works. So really valuable in terms of getting everybody on the same page. But the other reason that we were mapping the process was so that we could understand how to build a wellness app to track the health and well-being of the staff at Aviation Gin. So any of these activity boxes, I can right mouse click and then add a requirement. Now the requirements may already exist, or I can add new ones. So I can have a look in the list of requirements that are already there, and there's already a tag called wellness. So anything that's a requirement for wellness is tagged there. So we've got, understand the wellness, track meditation. The effectiveness of meditation probably comes later. An app to track wellness. So let's add all of those. We can see there, each of those different requirements has been added to that step. And you can see there at the being raised status. So all requirements inside Elements, you can manage them through a formal workflow. So let's think about beating the berries. That would be another area where we maybe want to track people's wellness. So maybe the effectiveness of meditation, maybe the wellness of staff. Oh, and understand anger management. There we go. There's a requirement there. And maybe at the Making Gin stage, we actually want to track maybe the wellness of staff, maybe how many sick days are taken. Maybe the stills need to be looked after 24/7, so maybe we need to track the extended working, the effective working hours. And we can put more information in there. I can tag it with wellness. So you can see we're working our way around this, the process, starting to identify the requirements, which we then can create user stories, and then that will help us build the application. The other powerful feature is that if I look at the highest level, I haven't clicked onto any activity box, and I'm looking at the tab here for requirements. If I roll over any one of those, this is the understanding the wellness of staff, you can see it lights up the particular processes that are impacted by that particular requirement. So you can see there, understanding the wellness of staff, there are 3 process steps there that are highlighted. So a really good way of visualizing the impact or the change associated with any particular requirement on a process. The other thing we can do is we can link this to Salesforce metadata. So these are either the new objects, the new Apex classes, the new page layouts, or it's the existing metadata inside Salesforce. So we can make that connection. So let's do that very quickly. So one of the things that Elements does is we can synchronize all the metadata in an org. And you can see here, this is synchronized, a number of managed packages, a number of custom objects. But if we go down to standard objects down here, and let's go and link the employee object. So there is the employee object. I copy that. I can then right mouse click and attach that to a number of different steps where we think it's important. So now if I go to any particular step, I can see that the employee object has been connected to that particular activity box. And it doesn't have to be just an object. It could be down at field level. It could be an Apex class. It could be I go down a bit further, it could be a particular page layout. It's the employee layout. Copy that. Right mouse click. So I can now see from this particular activity, Beat the Berries, there are particular layouts or particular objects or Apex classes or process builder workflows that are associated with that. So I'm starting to build up a picture here of exactly how we're going to implement this process. There may be some new objects. Now they don't exist in Salesforce yet, and I could go here and so maybe there's a new custom object, which is our meditation object. So I could right mouse click and say, create a proposed object. And this is the meditation. And we can create an API name. I've now created that inside this tree. And when that meditation object appears inside Salesforce with the same API name, we will then connect it. So we're not building that object inside Salesforce, we're simply creating a place where we can document it. It now means that I can now copy the link, right mouse click, and I've now started to document this particular object, even though it doesn't yet exist in Salesforce. As I said, once it gets created in Salesforce with the same API name, we'll then connect the two, and therefore this link will then go straight through to Salesforce. The last thing is that this process diagram can be used as training material and embedded inside Salesforce. So we said that the process diagrams were valuable because it got everyone on the same page. They were valuable because we could start to identify what changes we needed to make to applications or what new applications. But the third use was that we could use them as training material. So let's just look very quickly at how that works. So in our employee object, we went and linked that process called meditate to the employee object. If I click there and say, please show it in Lightning, that now makes that process diagram available to the employee object inside Salesforce. So I said that we can make those process diagrams available inside Salesforce. So you can see here already that diagram displayed inside a Lightning Web Component. We simply go to the page builder, drop in our Lightning Web Component and just paste in the ID of that diagram. And this is a live diagram. It is, you can navigate, you could drill down to the next level of detail. You could attach training material to any activity box and have it visible. So that's the first place that you can find it. The second is that we take over the help icon either on fields or in this case at the object level, and there is the link to that process diagram, again inside our dynamic window, with the ability to rate it, was it helpful or not, the ability to make comments, so we can start to try process improvement. And the third place where you can access those process diagrams, and again, this doesn't have to be inside Salesforce, you could be inside any app, inside Chrome is through our Chrome extension. Click there, and you can then search on any process diagrams you've made available for the search. And you can see here, let's click on the Make Gin process. And again, it's inside a dynamic window. I can navigate around, I could go up to the level above this, and I can rate it. So the importance of these process diagrams is, yes, understanding how we all operate to get us on the same page, yes, to build applications, but finally, we can use them as training material with very little extra effort. Simply either making the link available to the Chrome extension, or embedding inside a Lightning Web Component, or linking it to an object. Suddenly that is available to all end users to understand how things work. Hopefully that was fun, maybe not very dissimilar to some of the discussions you have with your clients when you're trying to help them understand how to drive digital transformation, how to re-engineer their business processes. I promised you some resources. So on the left-hand side, the UPN resources, the Trailhead Process Mapping course, a blog that I wrote about UPN and when to use it. On the right-hand side, the link to the Salesforce diagrams training on architect.salesforce.com, and again, a blog about how to draw Salesforce diagrams. And then relevant to both UPN and Salesforce diagrams is a blog I said about the 3 considerations. And then at the bottom there, you can go and use elements.cloud, create a playground, and you can start building out UPN and Salesforce diagrams. And then the demo area, there are some examples of both styles of diagram. And again, if you want to click on that QR code, that will take you to a page with all those links and also a copy of the deck. So thank you for joining me. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And again, a big shout out to the sponsors for making this possible.